Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family, Hazelina and Delightingale. Thank you both so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes heard nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight we continue with a how-to guide that's proven very popular. And why not? It's about one of the world's favorite foods. Let's relax with more from the Handbook on Cheesemaking by George E. Newell. First published in 1889 by the Michigan Dairymen, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Let's pick up right where we left off with some advice for the cheesemaker. Let's begin. Potent maxims for the cheesemaker. Keep a perfectly sweet, clean vat and spotless shining apparatus and utensils. Make an olfactory test of every mess of milk before it is dumped into the weighing can, and reject all that is tainted, unclean, or tending toward the sour, as by the acceptance of such injured milk you damage your own trade reputation, detract from the dividend of every patron who furnishes perfect milk, and irreparably wrong every consumer of the cheese. Insist on each one of your patrons straining their milk through a fine cloth strainer of double thickness, and use the same yourself for it to pass through into the vat. In heating up your milk to a temperature to meet a reception of the rennet, stir it frequently and gently. Never set above 86 degrees Fahrenheit in spring and fall, and 84 degrees in summer. Remember that too high heat before setting separates the butter globules from the milk structure, and that they are subsequently lost in the whey. Use nothing but stone jars for keeping rennet. If a mess of rennet worth perhaps $1 should get slightly tainted, throw it away rather than impregnate it through $200 worth of cheese and cause serious illness among numerous human beings. Use only anatoine cut directly from the seed by the chemical action of potash. The imputation that urine is used in the paste preparation should make every manufacturer shun it with loathing until the vile stigma is disproved. Be at least 5 minutes in stirring the rennet into milk. Stir it with great gentleness so that the butter globules will not be displaced. Curd should stand not less than 40 or more than 60 minutes after the application of rennet before cutting, the variation in time to be governed by season, condition of milk, and desired keeping qualities. Curd is fit to cut up when it will split clean before the finger, but is not so brittle as to break before the advancing knife. Cut first with the horizontal knife lengthways, then crossway, then lengthways with the perpendicular blade. If milk is very ripe and a quick scald is necessary, cut once more crossway with the perpendicular blade. Never slash curd in cutting, as it starts milky way and lowers your yield. After cutting curd, if milk is in normal condition, it is perhaps better to agitate the curd gently for a few moments before heat is applied. If milk has already taken on acid, apply heat immediately after cutting. In agitating curd, use the hands for the first 15 minutes, then manipulate it with a rake. Stir only enough to keep it separated and prevent it from scorching on the hot bottom of the vat. Remember that cooking curd thoroughly is, without doubt, the most important part of the whole program of cheese making. Do not place sole reliance on thermometer figures. Let your judgment rule supreme above that. See that every day's curd, the product of milk in all stages of maturity, does not part with the whey until it is cooked to a state of contractibility, in which the cubes will separate by expansion after pressure by squeezing in the hand. No maker considers his bread free from rawness until it has received a certain amount of heat in the oven. And no cheesemaker can expect to get a mellow, firm cheese unless he cooks his curd as above described. By using the smallest amount of heat possible to cook curd within a reasonable time, a finer quality of cheese is secured and a better yield. Hold curd in the whey until it will string fine threads 1/4 of an inch in length on the hot iron. Aim to have the whey well drained out of the curd before it is ground. Do not grind curd when it is too hot. If necessary, cut into small blocks or strips and scatter over the bottom of the vat to cool to a temperature to about 85 degrees Fahrenheit before grinding. Cheesemakers should not be too much wedded to fixed rules. For instance, do not always hold curd in the whey until it shows 1/4 of an inch of acid by the iron, simply because it may be a rule. Let your judgment rise supreme over all rules. Frequently through the summer, there are cool nights when the milk keeps so sweet that the next day no acid will show by the time you have the curd thoroughly cooked. At such times, as an experiment, draw off the whey sweet and let the curd develop acid in the pack. For your particular locality, quality of milk, and character of feed, such a method may produce finer cheese than if soured in the whey, and it may not. You must test all of these little details to find out. 2 pounds of salt and the fractional parts of 1/3 pound, up to 16 ounces per 1,000 pounds of milk, covers the cheesemaker's scale for the season in this department. As a rule, 2 pounds in the spring, with a gradual ascendancy in quantity as the apex of hot weather approaches, and then a declination in quantity toward fall, is about the average amount used per 1,000 pounds of milk for the cheddar process. There are more makers who do not salt above 2½ pounds in hot weather than there are who use 3 pounds. High salting retards curing, and the object now is to get a new cheese onto the market as quickly as possible. With a wet curd, salt a little more than the rule by which you are running, so as to make up the loss that goes out with the whey. Cheese for the British market. This quality of goods, generally known as shipping cheese, is made by the same process that we have described in this book, with the exception that it is or should be worked down more. Worked down implies that a firmer cheese is produced, one cooked more, salted a trifle higher, and soured more. These requisites lend a cheese body and prolong its keeping qualities. With all this, it must be mellow, close-textured, and fine-flavored. The English consumer wants such a cheese, or he wants none. A word to the wise is sufficient. Skimmed cheese. Making edible skimmed cheese is an effort to supply a constituent for the product that does not exist, namely, oleaginous matter. The butter or cream in milk is what gives rich flavor and mellow body to cheese. When a part or whole of this is removed by the skimmer, the depleted fluid, if manufactured into cheese, just as that containing all of the cream would be, will make dry, tasteless stuff. Skimmed cheese must be cooked, soured, and salted less than full cream. Flat skims can often be scalded at 93 and 94 degrees Fahrenheit, but of course this must be governed entirely by the rules relating to thorough cooking. Floating curd. Floating curd emanates from the rankest known species of tainted milk. The curd is surfeited with offensive poisonous gas that holds in check the acid and will inhabit the curd until its life has died out. All the cheesemaker can do is to wait patiently until its existence has ended and the curd, ceasing to be inflative, develops acid. Then grind and salt the usual amount, airing by thorough stirring for an hour or more, with doors and windows open to expel the taint. Let it sour in the pack. If ground and salted before gas has left it, the cheese will huff up like puffballs. Boxing cheese for market. After the cheeses designed for shipment are selected, examine every one and look to it that there are no surface shortcomings. If there are, the discrepancy must be remedied. Aim to have the cheese go into the package neat and attractive in appearance. A firm elastic rind, well oiled, and a spotless bandage cloth. If forming the cuticle of a squarely built, well-shaped cheese, is all in the line of the appearance that is desired by dealers and retailers. In weighing the cheese, give good up weight, taking no account of anything less than a pound. Use the best quality of scale boards and boxes obtainable, and have the latter fit the cheese snugly. After a cheese is weighed, place a scale board on the top end and shove a box onto it. Flop box and cheese over, and as the latter settles into the case, mark the weight on the side of the box. If the box is too high, shave the rim down to the cheese surface and place on a scale board and then cover. It is imperative that the covers fit tightly and snugly, and that any superfluous rim on the box be shaved off. No cheese is properly prepared for transportation unless it is so tight in the box that it cannot shift and knock about. Brand the boxes in a neat, workmanlike manner, having the lettering show plainly and distinctively. Then your cheese are ready for the freight car or the vessel's hold. Cheese are often slightly moldy on their bandaged sides when cured in damp, warm weather. To obviate this, when boxing, rub the sides thoroughly with a dry, soft cloth, and do not box until just before shipping. No cheese should be placed in boxes in hot weather until a few hours before transportation. Standing for several days in tight packages and exposed to a high temperature will not only try the quality of the cheese, but will positively injure the flavor of the best. If they could all go to their destination in refrigerator cars, this evil would be greatly ameliorated. With the facilities at hand, however, aim to place them on the market in as neat a shape as they rested on your curing room shelves. The hot iron test. I do not know what cheesemakers would do nowadays without the hot iron to guide them in evenly maturing curd. It is one of the most essential attributes of making. It should, of course, be most judiciously used. In 1845, Mr. L. M. Norton of Goshen, Connecticut, discovered that the acid in curd could be gauged by stringing threads from a heated iron. He kept the discovery a secret for a long time, but at last divulged it. To supply yourself with a handy instrument for testing acid, take a 3/4-inch bar of iron a foot long and set one end into a ferrule on a wooden handle. It can then be conveniently handled without burning the fingers. Heat the metal a little hotter than desired, and then thrust for a moment into a bucket of water to thoroughly clean the surface. Holding it in the left hand, take a piece of curd squeezed dry of whey and press against the iron. If it does not adhere at all, the curd is perfectly sweet, no matter how it may smell to you. If it clings slightly, you may be assured that acid is beginning to develop, so keep close watch of it. Curd ought never to string out threads more than 1/4 of an inch long before whey is drawn, and oftentimes less is desirable. Have the iron at just the right temperature, or you cannot make an accurate test. A right temperature implies that the iron is so hot that the curd will fry around the edges when pressed against it, but not so hot that it will scorch over. Tainted and floating curds will often string threads 6 inches and more in length, and then not be fitted to grind and salt. As soon as acid has overcome the gaseous condition of such curd, so that the inflation will subside, it is ready to grind, but not before. Cheesemakers should not be afraid of souring and airing such curd too much. Milk. In the manufacture of cheese, the constituents of milk demand our first attention, as we cannot intelligently study a subject without investigating its primary principles. Cow's milk contains water, 864 parts out of 1,000, nitrogenous matter, casein and albumin, 43 parts, sugar of milk, 52 parts, fat, 37 parts, and mineral salts, 4 parts. The solids represented above are in the form of minute globules, and the serum in which they float is the water or whey. It is to unite these globules and separate them from the whey that is the primary function of cheese making. It so happens that rennet, the active agent in this process, besides exerting an automatic chemical action on milk, imparts to the solids new and vigorous properties that give cheese a medicinal value to the human stomach, namely, an inceptor of digestion. It is imperative that a cheesemaker understands enough about milk to instantly detect the slightest change from its sweet, pure, normal condition. Milk as a fluid is highly sensitive to unclean odors, and when it absorbs them in a greater or less degree, the maker should, by an olfactory test, discover the taint. Milk that has been tainted by a retention of the animal heat, not having been cooled when freshly drawn, will give off a rank, burned smell, nauseous in the extreme. If the taint was absorbed from odors, the peculiar scent of the particular stench will be indelibly impressed on that fluid. Mature or sour milk is more to be desired for cheese manufacture than milk poisoned by taint. In fact, a slight maturity of milk is necessary, or at least desirable, to produce a fine cheese, the same as mature cream is required to develop good butter. Only in the former, the ripeness must be scarcely perceptible, while in the latter it must be well advanced. All tainted milk, and all milk that is old and nearly sour, should be unconditionally rejected at the cheese factory for manufacture. Do not be afraid of financially losing by such a rule. It is none too stringent, and in the end it will give your goods a trade reputation that will be secure and impregnable. The idea that really good cheese can be made out of poor milk is disproved by chemistry and common sense. Salt. One of the most important factors in cheese making is the saline mineral known as salt. A cheese can be manufactured gilt-edged in every way, but if it contains no salt, an insufficient quantity of it, or that which is of a weak, inferior quality, it is simply a mass of perishable nitrogenous matter that will soon go to putrefaction. Salt checks the growth of the lactic acid as quickly as a rush of air snuffs out a candle. Therefore, it has complete control over the quality of the cheese in this direction. It preserves that quality for an indefinite time, provided it exists in a sufficient proportion and the cheese has been scientifically made. Then again, salt gives firmness and flavor to the cheese. Thus, perceiving that cheese, as a component of human food, could not exist without salt, the analogy between the purity of that article and the fine quality of cheese is at once apparent. It is needless to advise the use of nothing but a fine, pure grade of salt for savoring cheese. Perhaps instead of needless, it is needful to admonish manufacturers in this regard. I regret to say that I have observed many who held false ideas of economy about so cheap an article as this briny product. A difference of 25 cents on a barrel would turn their judgment in favor of the cheaper, coarser article, and while really the losers thereby, they would feel complacent over a supposed gain. It is just such little slights as this, substituting poor for good salt, that help make up the discrepancy in quality already perceptible in American cheese. The dairymen of this country possess the most advantageous position of any class of dairymen in the world. For years, their milch cattle have been bred toward the extinction of beef characteristics and toward the fostering and enlargement of lacteal tendencies, until now, in point of blood, the general average is high. Intelligence, skilled labor, and ingenuity are at command, and should so leaven the products of our dairies that they should stand above all competitors. Then why be penny-wise and pound-foolish when so grand a prize as national trade reputation is at stake? Cheese manufacturers employ only the most experienced and careful help obtainable, and be willing to pay them liberally for their services. Look only to the quality of your cheese, and let the ratio take care of itself. No matter if it takes 11 or 12 pounds of milk to produce a pound of cheese, provided that cheese is gilt-edged in every particular. Use nothing but first-class material, from the rennet, coloring matter, and salt that goes into the cheese, to the scale board and the box that covers it. Let the foreign demand wane if it wants to. We know how to relish good cheese here at home, just as well as our English brothers, and in the future, we are going to consume more of the product per capita too. Homemade cheese. Exhaustive rules for manufacturing cheese on a small scale at home occasionally go the rounds of the agricultural press. Some of them contain ideas of real merit, and some do not. All middle-aged people who have in younger days lived in localities where dairying reached even modest pretensions can recall the sweet-savored cheese room, an adjunct of the kitchen, whose furnishing of primitive milk utensils was then considered ample for the housewife's use. Associated dairies or factories soon came upon the stage, and their vast superiority of method, coupled with the adoption of the cheddar system, marked an era in cheese improvement, which said in effect, if not in words, that home dairy cheese must go. The innovation of factories undermined and swept out of existence this small fry of amateur production, because home dairymen would not or could not adopt the cheddar improvement and manipulate their milk with skilled labor. Dairies associated together under factory regime facilitated such an easy and quick disposal of one's milk, and at such a greatly enhanced profit, that the obvious convenience and economy of the new order of things, more than any inimical characteristic it possessed, pulled down the one and set up the other. It matters not, though, to consumers in America or England, whether the cheese they eat is made under the roof of a farmhouse on a small scale or in a mammoth factory on a large one, provided the quality is good. But there are serious drawbacks about making up milk in diminutive quantity that are hard to overcome. Let us discuss them and analyze their leading features. I think it is safe to assume that not one person out of 50 who attempts to make home dairy cheese today, but will manufacture it just as his fathers did 50 years ago. In their minds, the whole process is covered by coagulation of the milk, quick cooking of the curd, salting it, and pressing it. There is no thought of having the milk moderately mature, the curd thoroughly cooked, and then properly soured, and the salt judiciously applied. The amateur knows nothing about the fine yet necessary points of manufacture, and so his cheese lacks the fine but requisite points of quality to ensure it trade recognition. We all like good cheese to eat, but in this country, thanks to the skimmer, it is getting so that the good article is very scarce, and promises to be scarcer if the skimmer's relations with the factory are not soon done away with. A great many readers who live in non-cheese manufacturing districts appreciate mellow, rich cheese when they sometimes at long intervals find it on their groceryman's counter, and vow that they would eat the article more if the price was cheapened and the general quality raised. You should, if you live 100 miles or so from any factory, and if you have a few cows and your neighbor has a few more, club together and make up some cheese for your own use. You have a vivid remembrance of how your mother used to manage it years ago. Discard the wooden tub that she used, for now we have tin vessels that are far preferable. Get 200 or 300 pounds of milk together if possible, but do not rob it of a bit of cream. Keep that well worked into the fluid. Have a heavy-bottomed tin box with round corners made at the tinners, one that is so shaped that it will fit into a large cauldron kettle, and yet leave a couple of inches of space between its outside surface and the iron sides of the kettle. This space is for water, which should be used as the best conductor to raise the temperature of the milk. Set the kettle in a brick or stone arch in which kindle a slow fire. With the tin vessel filled with milk and water about it in the way described, you have a cheese vat in miniature. Have a thermometer handy. Stir the milk often and do not let it get above 85 degrees before setting. Draw the fire out before it has fairly reached that temperature, as the afterheat will raise it a degree or two. Do not trust to your knowledge of the strength of rennet. Buy some rennetine and carefully follow directions as to the amount necessary to coagulate 100 pounds of milk. Work the rennet in thoroughly, and then cover the little vat up with a piece of sheeting. It is very important to have just enough rennet, as too much or too little will spoil the cheese. Have your tinner make you 2 curd knives, one with perpendicular and the other with horizontal blades. When the coagulated milk will break squarely over the finger and whey begins to start around the edges, cut it quite finely with the knives, using first the perpendicular and then the horizontal one. Raise the temperature slowly, not to 100 or 110 degrees, but to a point where the curd is thoroughly cooked, but not to dryness. Stir the curd and whey up at frequent intervals to keep it from packing. Do not hustle it into the press now just because you have it cooked, unless it is sour. Remember that the curd must mature, or in other words, generate acid. Therein lies the future good quality of the cheese. Do not rely on your olfactory sense to gauge the sourness. Press a little piece of the curd against a hot iron. When it pulls out strings 1/2 of an inch long in spring, 1 inch long in midsummer, and 1/2 inch in fall, it is sour enough to be salted. Have the whey all dipped off and the curd drained before it has reached a maturity sufficient to salt. Do not salt in hot weather higher than 1/4 of a pound to 100 pounds of milk, and in spring and fall less. As you have at the most only a little curd to manipulate, do not let it get cold, but put it in the hoop at a temperature of at least 75 degrees. Do not try to save over curd for another batch the next day. Better have 2 20-pound cheese in 2 days than 1 40-pounder during the same time. You cannot graft new curd onto old without lowering the quality of the whole. After you have a curd in the hoop, do not try to press it with stone weights because there is so little of it. Have a small press frame and a screw for that purpose. These small cheese will cure quickly. Keep the ends well oiled and lay them on a shelf in a warm room where they should be turned and rubbed every day. The foregoing pointers are intended for persons who have some previous knowledge of making dairy cheese, and therefore minute details of explanation have not been given. The trouble with most home dairy makers is that they do not realize the importance of souring the curd, and so make weak, off-flavored, perishable stock. October cheese. How are we to make as good cheese in October as we have been turning out in September? This is the mental query that will sometimes arise in the minds of makers whose experience is not measured by length of years. A 1/12th turn of the wheel of the yearly chronological table ought not to produce such a vast change in lacteal affairs as to exert a radical change in the manufacturing process. Of course, the artificial subdivisions of the season would be of but small moment in the case if they were not to a certain extent analogous to natural atmospheric changes. As September wanes into October, the summer is insidiously but surely attaining its maturity. The grass roots, having in a prolific manner fulfilled their annual mission, fail to send forth the tender blade of earlier months. Blighting frosts sear the pastures and sap the succulence from the feed. It is but natural that such an alteration in climatic influence should leave its effect on the milk. It is a maxim of cheesemaking that you must work milk according to its condition, not expecting one invariable rule to cover the whole science, but keeping in mind numberless distinct methods of treatment for instant application as exigencies arise. As a general thing, less acid is deemed necessary for the October make than was applied to the September product. I believe that in making this important change, the majority of manufacturers are too abrupt in method and reduce the standard of ripeness prematurely in point of time. A certain amount of acid is necessary to impart flavor and ensure good keeping qualities. Hence, more of it is required in hot weather than in cold, as a defense against high temperature. Many think that as soon as the hot days are past, the need of an advanced curd maturity is past also, and make almost sweet cheese. If there is anything that is fraught with dire consequences in cheese making, it is extremes practiced in the modus operandi. Avoid anything so derogatory, and let conservatism characterize your movements. Despite seasons and weather and climate, we have got to apply just so much acid to cheese to make it palatable and mellow, and if the product is liable to encounter crucial weather enough, more sourness to retain the flavor established is imperative. But what weakens fall goods is that in decreasing the acid, in view of cold weather ahead, the retrograde is pushed beyond its own needs and infringes on the quality of the cheese. In their zeal to have the standard just right, I have known old makers to produce a lot of weak October cheese before they realized where the trouble was. Better have a little fullness of acid on fall stock than not enough. Doctor, why is it that you always buy a late fall cheese for winter family use? Was asked one of the medical fraternity by a factory employee as he delivered a 40-pounder at his door. We have, in my estimation, far better goods on the shelves made in August and September, and the price is the same. Well, you see, young man, said the doctor, pouring some quinine into a vial, I have a notion that late fall cheese is healthier. The milk is no richer perhaps than in September, but the air is cool and pure. And of course you know what a debilitating effect heat waves and miasmatic atmospheric currents have on milk. Well, the less poison there is in the air, the less there will be in the milk, and subsequently in the cheese. Consequently, my choice. I believe the man of pills argued in the right direction there. But then there is happily a way of expunging from the curd infections absorbed by the milk from the atmosphere, namely airing. The most diabolical enemy of October cheese is the skimmer. In factories where that is unused, there is a clear field for developing fine stock, but there is no concealing the fact that all attempts to smooth over the impoverishing effects of its use by the most skilled treatment are futile and unavailing. If all of the good endeavor to make mellow, rich cheese out of substance that is but dross was expended in divorcing the illegitimate union of creamery and cheese factory, incalculable benefit would accrue to dairy interests. This month, avoid cold draughts through the make-room during the scalding process, as a vat presents a large surface for a current of air to exert a chilling effect upon. Be sure and cook the curd enough. There is a vast amount of fall-made cheese that comes to grief through insufficient scalding. If you do not bake a loaf of bread thoroughly, you have a doughy and unpalatable article of food, and if curd is not cooked until it has passed the raw state, it will retain a certain quantity of whey and damage the product on the shelves. This is the cause of strong-flavored, flabby-textured cheese. A gentleman of long experience in the trade has said, "The truth is, as it is difficult to cure cheese in cold weather, it ought to be cooked more than will answer in hot weather, and sour less, as the tendency is to acidulation in a cool atmosphere, in consequence of the moisture not drying out soon enough." To this we can append the suggestion of never trying to cure a cheese in a cool atmosphere, for the result will be a failure. A cheese cannot help but grow old in a cold room, but it will never cure. A significant report. A recent issue of the Utica Herald contains the following. Quote, "A New York gentleman who has recently returned from Liverpool writes to a friend in this city and reports the situation healthy on the other side, but says New York State cheese are done for as far as fine cheese goes. It is the same old trouble we have mentioned time and again. Too much cheese to the pound of milk, no body. Canada and even New Zealand are taking the trade of fine cheese from the States. Our factory men will wake up to the fact some day and find their goods are only second class. In fact, it is about so now. New York State cheese sell under Canada all the way from 1/2 at 1 cent per pound. We have preached this a long while, but it is beginning to be realized now. This accounts for the large shipments from Canada during the last 2 months and the small ones from here. End quote. The cheese industry is not yet of sufficient magnitude to exert any marked influence on the European markets, but as the dairy industry is constantly expanding there, and the state's product must stand on its own merits, it behooves manufacturers to avoid the pit that their brothers of the Empire State have inadvertently stumbled into. We consume a large amount of cheese here at home, and why are not our stomachs as worthy to be catered to as are the digestive receptacles of our English cousins across the pond? Yet there is no alarm in cheese circles as to deteriorated quality until British buyers find something that suits them better, and for which they are willing to pay more. Truly, cheese-eating New Yorkers are a very patient people. We have before us the file of a leading American cheese report of 1868, 20 years ago. It says, "We are behind the Canadians as regards firmness, but ahead of them in point of flavor. The same relation exists between American and Swedish cheese, also between American and English cheese and other European makes. With the exception of a few of the best English brands, which are equal if not superior to our finest grades as regards flavor, and superior in fineness and firmness of texture. This was America's prestige a score of years ago. Why has it not been sustained? The cause is clear to the most obdurate. Producers supposed their cheese supreme in the English markets, and have been abusing an established trade reputation with impunity. Their folly is now apparent, and the question naturally arises, will they play the role of the prodigal son and return to a path of trade rectitude? That implies that the bands that unite the creamery and the cheese factory be irrevocably severed. Send the skimmer higher than Gilroy's kite, as it were. The American people can appreciate good cheese just as well as the English. We want good butter too, but not at the cost of the cheese quality. That is not necessary, and a few years ago we did not deem it so either. Why should there be a tendency in that direction now? We are now better equipped in every department to send out better cheese than we did in 1868. Yet notice the difference in the two reports quoted. We are better equipped because we have more scientific appliances for handling milk. Our milk is better because the pastures are improved, and a finer grade of stock feeds upon them. Makers of today, who rely on the accumulated cheese wisdom handed down through 2 decades of experience, should be rich enough in knowledge to at least not retrograde from the standard of 1868. Let us for one moment lay reform in the tariff and reform in the civil service on the table and talk, think, and act about reform in cheese. Michigan always takes a front seat when reformation of any kind is agitated. We are satisfied that she will not take a back seat now. There has probably not been such a tendency in this state as in other localities to rob milk at both ends and on the sides before it is suffered to coagulate in cheese. But let us smother what infection there is before it becomes an established blight on the Wolverine product. We are satisfied that our dairymen are alive to their interests here and will not drift away from safe anchorage. A shipping cheese requires more body, or in other words, more acid and firmness than a cheese designed for home consumption. This is partly due to the fact that such a quality is demanded by European consumers, and partly because an ocean voyage necessitates it. It takes more milk to make such cheese, and less milk to produce the softer and more perishable home trade goods. In thrusting the cheaper article on the foreign market, New Yorkers have staked a hazardous venture and lost. Nothing is said about the skimmer, but it gets in its insidious work all the same. Not under full cream brands, probably. We do not insinuate that, but the markets are crowded with night and flat skims, occupying space that should be filled with richer goods. Skims are sent over to England when they really want full cream. Canada and New Zealand step in with a fine quality of the latter brand, and they take it even in preference to the state's best offering. We hold skimmed cheese greatly responsible for the trade depression under which the American article is now laboring. It is high time that the dry, hard stuff was known no more in all the earth. Prepared rennet and color. The value to the cheese trade of scientifically prepared rennet and annatto color cannot be overestimated. Rennet extract and one quality annattoine are not in general use, but they should be. With the home-prepared infusion of both articles, we have 1,000 diverse shades of quality and degrees of strength. And worst of all, they are often applied to the milk hit or miss. The result is unevenness in cheese quality and color, where there should be perfect uniformity. We advise all makers to renounce as fast as practicable the old, often unsatisfactory method of soaking rennet skins and steeping annatto seed, and adopt reliably prepared extracts of these essential cheese ingredients. Cheese that huff. A good, properly manufactured cheese will never huff up on the surface or swell the bandage to the point of protuberance. Cheese often huffs slightly when curing, and afterward flatten into a smooth, firm surface. But they are never number one stock. The writer can remember 15 years back when makers did not understand working gaseous curds as they do now. Sales and shipments were far between then, and cheese accumulated in great numbers in factories. It was no uncommon thing in the years 73 and 74, in passing through a curing room containing 500 or 600 cheese, to find a large percentage of the umber covered with immense blisters that held in retention offensive-smelling gases. Every day, the maker would lance these unhealthy swellings with a wire or goose quill, only to have them shortly after bulge out in another place. Besides these partially affected cheese, there were often days' makes of those that would huff all over, swell out like huge puff balls, till a slight jar would have rolled them from the shelves. These were the product of floating curds with the gas all left in. A decade and a half ago, farmers did not take the same care of their milk that they do now. They were not versed in dairy literature to any extent, and did not see the importance of speedily expelling animal heat from milk, or of always furnishing their cows with wholesome drinking water. Hence tainted milk was more often the rule than the exception. With the present bettered quality of milk and the improved skill of makers in handling it, inflative cheese ought to now be foreign to the curing room. Bad taints are at present seldom met with, but slight ones creep in unawares unless the maker is vigilant, and then it is his business to eradicate the ill savor. Sour until acid has completely overcome the gas. Grind twice and give the curd a prolonged airing by frequent stirring. Try the prolonged stirring on common curds that are hot, too hot to go immediately to press, and notice how it will enhance the flavor of the cheese. Factory utensils. As a maker, I have had opportunities of seeing milk in all stages and in all conditions, and I have found it an invariable rule that the milk furnished by farmers who read and studied the dairy question in all of its phases, who were conversant with dairy literature, and adopted the most improved methods extant for producing an abundant, pure, and rich flow of milk, were enough affected by the ideas absorbed from library and press to be unconsciously molded by their influence. On the other hand, farmers who never read, who avoided all progressive methods as new-fangled notions and clung to the primitive ways of their ancestors, forgetful that those ancestors adopted nothing new because there was no new thing to adopt, furnished milk sometimes good, often poor, and never profitable to themselves. A man who doesn't have an opinion on the relative value of milk breeds, who doesn't know how to feed scientifically, and who has narrow conceptions of systematic dairying, generally is in this competitive epoch an agricultural cipher. The other day, the writer inspected 2 cheese factories, separated by only a few miles, each being located on admirable sites and accessible to water. Previous to my visit, I had been told that the maker in B's factory had, during the past season, produced poor, uneven stock, which was a surprise to his friends, as his trade reputation was excellent. On the other hand, I knew that the cheese from W's factory, although manufactured by a man of less experience than his rival, had sold at prices above the former's and footed up a lower ratio. As soon as I had seen the interior of each building, the sequel was made plain to me, and subsequent investigation proved it. The first named factory was a mere shell, furnished with utensils both primitive and worn out. The second was a tight, plastered structure, and equipped with all of the paraphernalia essential to a modern cheese building. The competition was like running a pony express against a United States mail train. A cheese factory needs good, improved utensils, just the same as a farm requires machinery of the latest patterns. It should have a boiler because steam heating is cheaper, more under control, and consequently safer for scalding than where fire underheating is employed. It should be furnished with a curd mill, because with one the maker has the acid almost completely under control. Without a mill, the whey must be retained until nearly enough acid has developed to meet the requisite gauge. Then it must be hastily drawn and hastily salted, with the whey not all out of it. Too often, the acid is in advance of the maker's expectations. Cheese made in this way from day to day cannot help but be uneven in flavor, in salt, and in acid. Salting in the whey, as it is called, without a mill is wasteful too. As the whey flows off, the constant tendency of the curd is to pack, and hand manipulation to prevent this will start white whey, the lifeblood of the cheese, in wasteful quantities. With a mill to use, all this is changed. The whey can be drawn when but very little acid has appeared, and the curd, packed and drained, waits for the sourness to develop there. It matures more slowly than when submerged in whey, and when the right point is reached, the iron teeth of the mill attack it and tear it up and salt it when in a dry state, which is a great advantage. The make-room should be supplied with a gang press and patent hoops, because one screw will compress a dozen cheese, and solidify them more firmly than old-fashioned single screws. A good cheese can be spoiled after it is in the hoop by insufficient pressing. I consider the latest milk-handling devices almost as essential in a modern factory or creamery as the practical knowledge of the maker. Not merely for labor-saving purposes should manufactories be so supplied, but because the demands of present trade require dairy products of a complexion difficult to attain without. It is a penny-wise and pound-foolish policy to scantily furnish a butter or cheese plant, when thereby the loss on one underpriced sale would have more than covered the deficiency in tools. And with that advice about modernization, we have reached the conclusion of the Handbook on Cheesemaking by George E. Newell, a man not only of experience, but very definite opinions about American cheesemaking. I learned a lot while reading this to you, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. And because we finished that book, everyone on Patreon can expect a full-length reading with all 3 episodes of this book put together in a single long recording for those nights when you might want a little extra something. Look for that shortly. If you'd like to read this work for yourself, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, Good night.